This fact is wild. The richest 20% of the world's countries are now around 30 times richer than the poorest 20%. But why? This is one of the most interesting things I learned at the University of Oxford. It's the thing that all countries need for economic growth. Not having this one thing is an absolute guarantee that a country will remain poor. Let's dive into it. The hidden reasons why some countries stay poor are weak economic and political institutions. If you're feeling deflated and are thinking, that's so basic and that's not the magic pill answer I was looking for, well, let's unpack it in this video. Let's break this video down into 3 parts. Number 1, what are the common ideas about why some nations are prosperous and some remain poor? Number 2, what really are institutions? And number 3, let's look at the research of Acemoglu and Robinson on why institutions aren't the real answer. There are many ideas why some countries become richer and some remain poorer, but let's focus on 5. The geography of that country, the natural resources it has, technology and innovation, does it have an educated population, and finally the culture and social norms of that place. Some theories argue that where a country is located plays a huge part in if that country will be wealthy or not. Countries that are landlocked, for example those that are not near the sea to export their goods, are generally poorer than those who have better access. For example, a UN report writes that Kazakhstan is 3,750 kilometers from the nearest seaport. To export its ores and metals, one of its main export products, it takes on average 81 days. Now imagine trying to get an Amazon parcel from that country. Compare this to Austria, also landlocked but has good infrastructure and is less than 100 kilometers from the sea. Exporting in Austria only takes on average 9 days. So the export costs for Kazakhs is much higher than those are from Austria. The report goes on to describe that actually most landlocked countries that are developing have low GDP and low human development, and the large proportion of them are classified as least developed. Others also argue that if you're closer to developed countries, even if you're landlocked, because the countries around you have great infrastructure and stable institutions, transporting and selling your goods is easier. We gave the example of Austria, Hungary, and Slovakia, who are also landlocked, but can easily sell and transit through the EU. One of my professors, Sir Paul Collier, regularly gave us the example of Rwanda versus Burundi, however. Rwanda and Burundi are both landlocked, and they're right next to each other. In the mid-1990s, something catastrophic happened. After periods of horrendous intercommunal violence, their per capita income were identical. But if you see that now, Rwanda's has tripled, but Burundi's has fell dramatically. So why was there this spectacular divergence? Countries that are resource rich have minerals to extract. Fertile land, oil, and many other natural resources can benefit to grow their economy. This is certainly the case for countries like Saudi Arabia. Saudi Aramco, the most profitable company in the world in the last decade, is state-owned and has revenues of 440 billion in 2023. That's 40% of Saudi Arabia's GDP. However, if you compare that to Nigeria, who's the largest oil producer in Africa, their resource-rich economy is considered a resource curse, as it has only led to corruption, over-dependence on it, and crowding out of other prosperous sectors and economic instability. Just a few weeks ago, the US announced its Stargate project. 500 billion of investment over 4 years into AI infrastructure. 500 billion. Regardless of the launch of China's DeepSeek, the theory is that countries that can harness technological innovation are richer due to an increase in productivity. However, there's a huge exception to this rule, which is Russia. I recently watched Hidden Figures, which is an amazing movie about 3 remarkable African-American ladies who were essential to NASA for the early space flights. It shows, however, that it was Russia who launched the first satellite, Sputnik, in 1957.
Remember the Russian satellite, Sputnik?
And it was Russia who got the first man in space. However, despite their advancement in military and space technology, Russia's economic growth between 1970 and 1990 was lacking compared to countries like the US and Japan. So what else could it be? Related to technological innovation is countries with smarter people. If you're smarter, you can drive more innovation and thus make your country richer. However, this is not the case in Egypt. Egypt has increased its literacy rates from 50% in the 1980s to 75% today, with many more university graduates in STEM fields. However, economic growth has lagged behind due to a lack of job creation and many other factors. Education is certainly a silver bullet for economic growth. There's no doubt about that. But without a host of other factors coming together, it's insufficient. One of the most famous pieces of work comparing culture and social norms to economic growth was The Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism in 1905 by Max Weber. This suggests that the values of Protestantism, such as hard work, self-discipline, delayed gratification, that were broadly secularized in the West, were the foundations of economic growth from capitalism. The culture shift from viewing wealth as evil to wealth as a favor from God that can be reinvested underpins a norm in Western civilization that fosters growth, so the theory says. Other more recent cultural norms that many argue underpin economic growth are higher levels of social trust in Nordic countries, the culture of move fast and break things in Silicon Valley to boost technological advancement, and gender equality and the participation of women in the workforce. However, how much culture and social norms underpins economic growth is dubious. In fact, with all these 5 points, there are many factors that kind of suggest a chicken and egg problem. Which comes first? Is it richer countries are more educated because they can invest more in education? Or is it that educated countries are richer? Is it that countries with more technology are richer because of that technology? Or that richer countries just simply invest in more technology? Or is it that richer countries develop better cultures to grow more wealth? Or is it that richer countries already have those cultural norms and that's why it's so rich? This is the classic conundrum in science between correlation and causation. Just because two things are correlated doesn't mean they cause each other. For example, let's look at the number of ice cream sales on a beach and shark attacks. The greater the number of ice cream sales correlates with more shark attacks. It could seem that if you eat more ice cream on the beach, there would be more shark attacks. But actually, the key factor is hot weather. Therefore, all the factors above, although seemingly common sense, and of course, play a huge part in a country's economic success, they're not causative items. But the one that has been shown to be causative is the nature of a country's institutions. Before we delve into why institutions are important, we have to understand what institutions are. So institutions are defined as the rules, norms, and structures that shape political, economic, and social interactions in a society. Think of institutions as the rules of the game in society. They shape how power is used, how economies function, and how we interact with each other. Think of them like traffic lights. They keep things moving smoothly and prevent chaos and ensure fairness. We can break down institutions into two: formal or hard institutions that are written down into law, or informal, soft institutions that are based on traditions and unwritten rules. When we talk about hard institutions to begin with, they are known as formal, legally enforced rules that govern a country or an economy. Our courts and legal systems, the government, the Bank of England, the Crown Prosecution Service, Office of National Statistics, the Electoral Commission, the NHS, and yes, even the BBC are examples of hard institutions. Now, comparing that to soft institutions, they are the norms, traditions, and unwritten rules that guide behavior even when there's no legal enforcement. These cultural traditions have even led to the phrase, "he or she is a British institution," like this guy, or that guy, or even this guy, even though I'm an Arsenal fan. Others also included for me Maggie Smith, Judi Dench, and of course, the late Queen Elizabeth II. They are known as institutions. But anyway, back to it. Soft institutions can be as powerful as hard institutions as they really hold them up. Trust in politicians from the public hold up democratic institutions. The expectation that healthcare should be universally free holds up the NHS. Or the traditions and ceremonial role of the royal family holds up the smooth transition of political power in our democracy, especially here in the UK. So institutions are the backbone of any society. Hard institutions ensure stability, but without soft institutions like trust and cooperation, they can fail. And that brings us to the research of Acemoglu and Robinson. So Daron Acemoglu and James Robinson are popular names in economics and political science because of their book, Why Nations Fail. In fact, I think I have one here. So, their academic research on which the book is based, and alongside Simon Johnson, actually won the 2024 Nobel Prize in Economics. Now, earlier in this video, I made the case that rich countries are rich because they might have better land, better weather, smarter people, or tech, or even their culture is geared towards growth. Yes, again, I think these things matter, but Acemoglu and Robinson argue that they are not the main determinant of economic prosperity. They argue that it all comes down to one thing: the institution a country bears. Now, let's understand this by cutting across to the Korean peninsula and look at North Korea, who's run by this guy, the supreme leader Kim Jong-un, and South Korea, run by their presidential system. Yes, a side note, I know that Yoon Suk-yeol declared martial law in December 2024, and that's not a good sign, and was subsequently impeached, but their political system is still somewhat robust. Prior to World War II, both North and South Korea were one country, and they were under Japanese rule. Japan heavily industrialized parts of Korea for their own benefit between 1910 and 1945, meaning by the end of the war, Korea was one of the most developed parts in Asia, albeit under harsh colonial rule. So what happened to Korea when Japan surrendered in World War II? Well, the Allies divided Korea along the 38th parallel. The Soviet Union took control of the north and installed a communist government under Kim Il-sung, who is this guy's grandfather, and the United States took control of the south and installed a pro-Western democratic government under their leader. At first, this was supposed to be temporary, but tensions between the US and the USSR turned this into a permanent split. In 1950, Kim Il-sung wanted a communist unification of Korea and launched a full-scale invasion with the backing of Stalin in Russia and Mao Zedong in China. Within a few days, they captured Seoul, nearly taking over the entire South. But the US and the United Nations intervened, pushing North Korean forces back towards China. In 1953, the war was ended in a ceasefire, but no peace treaty was ever signed. This means to this day, the two Koreas are still technically at war. Both Koreas were in ruin. But at this critical juncture, their economies took very different paths. Remember, both these countries have similar cultures, they have a similar geography, they have a similar language, and even very similar natural resources. But fast forward to today, the difference is unbelievable. As of 2023, South Korea's GDP is 1.7 trillion, North Korea's is 23 billion. That's a whopping 60% smaller. South Korea has risen up to be one of the top 10 wealthiest nations in the world, a global tech leader, have a democratic state, and have a booming export market. North Korea still remains one of the poorest and most isolated dictatorships, with economic hardships and the constant threat of nuclear war. So why has this happened? Let's go back to Acemoglu and Robinson as they explain institutions. They break institutions down into two types: inclusive and extractive. Inclusive institutions are those that allow broad participation in economic and political life and create equal opportunities for individuals to innovate and prosper. On the other hand, when you have extractive institutions, they're designed to benefit a small elite at the expense of the majority. These systems restrict economic and political freedoms, discourage innovation, and concentrate wealth and power. Now, let's compare them further. In inclusive institutions, there are strong property rights, meaning that people and businesses have legal ownership over land, capital, and ideas. A fair patent system to protect people's ideas is an example of strong property rights. However, with extractive institutions, there are weak and non-existent property rights. At any point, the government can seize your land and wealth. In inclusive institutions, there are fair legal systems in which the law applies to prevent corruption. Whereas in extractive institutions, you really do get jobs for the boys. There is the opposite. Political power is concentrated at the top, meaning that the legal system is administered based on who you are. In other words, if you're mates with this guy, or even this guy, no one can touch you in your country. In inclusive institutions, there are free markets and competition which encourages investment, trade, and entrepreneurship. Whereas if you have extractive institutions, very few people can start a business and accumulate wealth. Again, look at the difference between North and South Korea. Now, on a side note, it's important to know it's free markets and competition. A strong government backing inclusive institutions must be able to properly regulate businesses to avoid industries becoming a monopoly. Now, I know this might affect the algorithm and if you're able to see this video, but a further essay question is, I guess, do big American tech giants like Google, that own YouTube, Meta, Amazon, or X count as monopolies and need the intervention of the US government?
DOJ wants Google to have to divest its Chrome browser.
Just food for thought. Finally, inclusive institutions have political pluralism, which means that multiple groups can have a voice in government, usually in a democracy. Extractive institutions means the rules favor, again, those in power. Dissenting voices are crushed and the government is oppressive. So therefore, although geography, smarter people, technology, natural resources are important, what really determines if a country can escape poverty and grow is the nature of its institutions. The more we can develop inclusive institutions, especially a strong and fair legal system that protects property rights, the greater chance of economic prosperity for a country. I hope this video sparked an interest within you on why some countries remain poor. Where are you tuning in from? And do you have an example of inclusive or extractive institutions from your country? Please let me know in the comments below. Of course, if it's safe to do so. If you're from some of the countries I mentioned, just maybe stay quiet and just watch the video. But for everyone else, if you've enjoyed my video, please hit that subscribe button, turn on your notifications so you never miss a video, and hopefully see you in the next one.